However, in BT10, in this deck especially, these cards are paramount. You have to have these cards if you're going to build the deck. And that is going to be... So one of my criticisms for this deck is that it's actually quite memory hungry. For that reason, I'm going to run 4 copies of this very next card. Super important. It's going to be Pride. So this next card is what I like to call a rainy day tech. In the case of things aren't really going my way, how can I really make a big swing in my favor? And because the BT10 meta revolves around playing lots of Tamers and Digimon at the same time, so let's imagine a scenario where you have your DarkKnightmon on the board, as well as your Nene Tamer who gives him blocker on your opponent's turn. But it's kind of risky to swing with a 7000 DP Digimon, because you risk losing him before you can Digivolve. So the idea here is to... What's going on, Tamers? It's me, guy who is juggling way too many card games at one time, but today we're taking a look at a deck profile for the DarkKnightmon deck that gets a lot of support in BT10's cross encounter with some of the new Digicross stuff, so let's get into it. Alright, so taking a look at the deck cam view here, I've got the 3 stacks for the deck, and we're going to cover this much like we did the Blue Flare Army deck profile video. Again, if you haven't seen that, go check it out. I'll put a link somewhere up there. But we'll first cover the core cards for the deck, followed by some of the support cards, and then finally some of the techs. So anyway, let's get into the core cards first. So these first set of core cards were actually released alongside the hybrid cards back in BT7, but because they weren't hybrids themselves, you probably didn't pay too much notice to them. However, in BT10, in this deck especially, these cards are paramount. You have to have these cards if you're going to build the deck. And that is going to be, first up, 4 copies of the BT7 Skull Knight, as well as 4 copies of the BT7 Deadly Axemon. So these guys work in tandem. You play a Deadly Axe, he lets you search out 2 Skull Knights from the top 5 cards of the deck, and then you can play the Skull Knight later and then swing with it, and then they can combine to create a DarkKnightmon. Talking a little bit about their inheritance effects, Skull Knightmon has the added bonus of if the Digimon has Knightmon or Bagaromon in its name, it gets security attack +1 for the turn, and then if it has Knightmon or Bagaromon in the name for the Deadly Axemon, it's going to get +2000 DP on your turn. And then working together with the Skull Knightmon and the Deadly Axemon, also released alongside these cards in BT7, are going to be in this deck 2 copies of the DarkKnightmon. You're not going to see his on-play effect, which is allowing you to take a Skull Knightmon and a Deadly Axemon from your hand or trash and put it up under him when he's played, because he's a hard 7 play cost, which is pretty rough. But what is good about him is that whenever he is destroyed on either turn, you take the Skull Knightmon and the Deadly Axemon in his sources and play them in rest position on the board as 2 separate Digimon. So it's kind of like he breaks apart whenever he's destroyed, which means you get to keep those Digimon, and you can potentially Digivolve one of those into another level 5, or you can do some other shenanigans with it later on we'll talk about. So this next card is actually going to be one of the 2 Digimon that features the new Digicross mechanic introduced in BT10, and it's going to be the Skull Knightmon Big Axe mode. So this guy is really great because he does a lot of things on play. And the first thing is he's going to search the top 3 cards for basically any card in the DarkKnightmon family. That includes the Tamers as well, Nene Amano. And then additionally, if you Digicross this guy using a Skull Knightmon and a Deadly Axemon, both of those cards, then you can first off reduce his play cost by 2, making him a 2 play. And then you can also delete a 4 cost Digimon on your opponent's side of the board. So one of the reasons I told you to only run 2 copies of the DarkKnightmon is because he has a big brother released in BT10 and he is fantastic. And that is going to be this guy here, 4 copies of the BT10 DarkKnightmon. He allows you to de-Digivolve an opponent's Digimon by 1 on play, and then if you Digicross this guy using 2 cards, you can destroy a cost 5 or lower Digimon on your opponent's side of the board. Fantastic removal, as well as the ability to de-Digivolve and get rid of some of those higher level Digimon effects at the same time. And additionally, whenever he's destroyed, by returning 1 card, 1 black level 4 card under his sources to your hand, you can play a Skull Knightmon or a Deadly Axemon on the board from up under his sources. And then finally, he's Digicrosses 2, so if you can Digicross with a Skull Knightmon and a Deadly Axemon, you can reduce his cost by 2 for each of those, which means he's going to be a 4 play cost Digimon who's level 5. Fantastic value. So like a lot of the Digicross decks that were released in BT10, you're mostly going to be focusing on these cards here. However, this deck does have a few level 6s, and that's going to be 3 copies of the DarkKnightmon X Antibody. So he functions very well with the X Antibody cards, having the X Antibody in his name and in his traits. Additionally, he Digivolves from a DarkKnightmon for 4 costs instead of the 5 you see here. And then whenever you Digivolve into this guy, you're going to grab a purple or black Digimon card from your trash other than DarkKnightmon X Antibody, add it back to your hand. After you've added a card back to your hand from the trash, after that you're allowed to actually delete a Tamer on the board. So you have the option of deleting one of your own Tamers, which we'll talk about in a moment. It could actually be beneficial for you, as well as you could also delete one of your opponent's Tamers at the same time, get rid of some of their effects. And whenever you do that, he becomes active again. And then whenever he's destroyed, you can play a DarkKnightmon from your hand or your trash onto the board. So that means you can grab this guy from the trash and then get his full effects of one play, or you can Digicross this guy and get the Digivolution and the removal as well. So the Dark Knight line actually got a tamer released alongside of it in BT10, and she is paramount to the success of this deck, and that is going to be 4 copies of the Amano Nene. So she allows you to look at top 4 and grab a Skullknightmon or DarkKnightmon or a Twilight Digimon, basically anything in the DarkKnightmon family, add it to your hand. Additionally, on your opponent's turn, all of your DarkKnightmon named Digimon or your Twilight Digimon gain blocker for the turn, which means on your opponent's turn, you have an army of blockers at the ready. And then finally, whenever she's deleted, you get memory +2, which means she has a little bit of combo potential with the DarkKnightmon X Antibody, in that he can delete her, gain some memory back, and make his Digivolution cost actually only 2 if you come from a DarkKnightmon. Now that we've talked about the core cards for the deck, let's talk a little bit about the support that we're going to get alongside of it. First off is going to be the actual Digitama. Very important for the deck, going to need these guys. Going to be 4 copies of Bakuman from BT8. He's great. Again, on deletion, he allows you to look at the top card of your deck. If it's black, add it to your hand. Super simple. So BT10 was actually really kind to this archetype in that it gave them more ways to search through the deck other than just the Deadly Axe Mon. And one of the ways that you can do that is actually with the 4 copies here of the new Monitormon. He allows you to look at the top 4 cards and then grab basically a black Deadly Axe or Nightmon named Digimon, add it to your hand, or a Twilight Digimon and add it to your hand. So the DarkKnightmon archetype really allows you to play a lot of level 4s on the board, and I think the best way you can take advantage of that to get that last hit in a lot of cases is not by using the Tamer hybrid cards, but instead using the Chimeramon. This deck's going to actually run 2 copies of that guy. Again, there's so many cases where you can either run in with a Darkknightmon and it gets destroyed and it gets to play level 4 on the field. Maybe you already have one on the field, or you can play 2 level 4s on the field. And this guy allows you to get to that level 5, become a new Digimon, erase any bad effects that might have been on him, and then swing for free at the end of the game. So moving away from some of the Digimon support for just a moment and taking a look at some of the option cards, the first card we're going to talk about is going to be the Immortal Ruler, 0-cost option card that got released in BT10. So if you have a Nene Tamer on the field, you don't have to worry about the color requirements for this card because it is black and purple. And then on play, you're going to trash 3 cards from the top of your deck, and then from your trash, you can grab a DarkKnightmon and play it on the field by paying its full cost. So if the DarkKnightmon that you play is Digicrossable, what you can do is use the trash cards as the material for the Digicross in addition to the cards in your hand or on the field. Keep in mind that you're going to be paying the full cost of that DarkKnightmon again, so if you can find the Digicrossable DarkKnightmon, that is absolutely going to be the target for this card. You don't want to have to play the regular one and give your opponent 7 memory to work with. If you can grab the Dark Knight Digicrossable version from BT10, he's only 4 costs, which means you're giving your opponent way less memory to work with. So one of my criticisms for this deck is that it's actually quite memory hungry. Most of the cards you're going to be playing are 4 cost. I don't have any right here, but a lot of the core cards are going to be 4 cost, which means even if you have that minimum 3 cost memory tamer on the board, it's going to be really hard to make a lot of plays in a single turn. Typically, you're going to be able to attack and then do something, or do something and maybe have no memory to attack. For that reason, I'm going to run 4 copies of this very next card. Super important. It's going to be Pride Memory Boost out from BT7, which is going to let you take a look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and then if there's a 4 cost or lower black Digimon among them, you can just play it out on the board immediately. You do get its own play effects. The rest of the cards are trash, and then this card is going to stick around on the board, more importantly, for a later turn where you can use Delay Memory +2, which means suddenly you can have those 5 memory turns where you can make a play something that's 4 cost, maybe attack, do something else, maybe Digivolve again after that. And then alongside those Pride Memory Boosts, you're going to want to have access to memory as much as you possibly can, and for that reason, you have to include at least 3 copies, in my opinion, of the Izzy Tamer. So this guy, I'm pretty sure a lot of you folks are familiar with. Take a look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and then if they're all black, you gain 1 memory whenever you play him, which means he's a 3-cost Tamer, technically, if you've run a black deck. And because this DarkKnightmon deck is mostly black, with the exception of maybe the Chimeramon, you're pretty much set. And then additionally, he's a minimum 3 memory Tamer. A nice little useful tip is if you have this and the Pride Memory Boost in hand, what you can do is you can play this guy out first, take a look what your next draw is going to be, and then you can set it up so that you draw 1 card, and then hopefully within the next 2 cards is going to be a Digimon that is Pride Memory Boostable, if you know what I mean. So now let's take a look at some of the text for the deck. Now most of these cards are going to be pretty defensive in nature. However, I do give myself the ability to sometimes high roll my opponent in some of the text for this deck, but I think that even if you don't high roll, they're still valuable cards to use. So these first 2 tech cards we've got are going to be based off of disrupting your opponent's game plan. And what better way to do that than either stopping their memory gain or stopping their memory reduction in some cases. So first up, we're going to have 2 copies of the Chumon from BT3. who stops all memory gain effects outside of Tamer's effects. And then we're going to have 2 copies of the Chikurimon from the Ragnalord starter deck. Now his effect on both turns stops both players from reducing the cost of Digimon that are played on the board. So if you Digivolve, his effect doesn't apply, but if you play Digimon on the board and try to minus its cost, much like lots of the Digicross Digimon do, he prevents that from happening. Now you might be saying, well, aren't you going to be doing that in this deck as well, using your DarkKnightmon or your Big Axe mode? However, when I have one of these guys on the board, it gives me control of the flow of the game, right? If I want to make a play where I use Digicross, that I can either Digivolve over him or swing in to security and usually get rid of him. If I don't want my opponent to be able to Digicross, I'll just keep him on the board until I don't need him anymore. In my opinion, really having access to control the flow of the game is really strong. So this next card is what I like to call a rainy day tech. In the case of things aren't really going my way, how can I really make a big swing in my favor? And because the BT10 meta revolves around playing lots of Tamers and Digimon at the same time, this BT9 by Human allows me to take advantage of my opponent who goes a little too crazy with that if they go too wide. So it is a bit expensive at 5 cost Digivolve, but if my opponent has enough cards on board, then that really doesn't matter, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. So first off, on Digivolve, if my opponent has at least 2 Digimon or Tamers on the board, basically 2 cards on the board, then he becomes active again. And then after that, he gains a memory for every card your opponent has on the board that is a Tamer and a Digimon, which means you can reduce his Digivolve cost, hopefully to 0 if your opponent is going too crazy. And then at the end of your turn, for every 2 active Tamers or Digimon your opponent has, they discard a security. So if your opponent is going really crazy and they're just kind of like waiting for their big hit, in the case of like Yellow Hybrid, then you can typically take off like 2 or 3 security in a single turn. So in BT10, this card was only really used in one deck archetype. However, in BT9, you can put this card in any deck archetype as a tech and it works well. And that's going to be, in this case, 1 copy of Dexmon, or Death Dexmon, I believe in English. So again, he takes advantage of your opponent having too many cards on the board, and basically for every Digimon or Tamer your opponent has, you can reduce his play cost by 3. And because his play cost is pretty heavy at 20, if your opponent typically has around 6 cards on the board, it's not bad. It's not a bad idea to play him, whether it's 3 Tamers, 3 Digimon, 4 Tamers, 2 Digimon, whatever the spread might be. And then on play or on Digivolve, he Digivolves everything on your opponent's side of the board by 1, and then deletes everything that's level 4 or lower. And then finally, at the end of your turn, he deletes the lowest cost Digimon on the board. So in like 99% of cases, this guy is going to wipe your board entirely of all of his Digimon. This really has become the counterplay card of the entire meta. The price has gone up really high, so if you grab this guy in BT9, please do it while you can before it gets even higher than it is. So this next card is a blast from the past, in that I mean it's only 1 set from the past, and that's going to be 1 copy of the X Antibody card. So this next single tech card is actually a fantastic offense and defense card in itself, and that is going to be 1 copy of the X Antibody option card. So let's imagine a scenario where you have your DarkKnightmon on the board, as well as your Nene Tamer who gives him blocker on your opponent's turn. Now, let's also imagine you have 3 memory to work with, and that means if you Digivolve into the DarkKnightmon X Antibody, your turn is effectively over. However, you also still want to be able to swing with this Digimon that you have on board, but it's kind of risky to swing with a 7000 DP Digimon, because you risk losing him before you can Digivolve. So the idea here is to place the X Antibody up under your DarkKnightmon, attack with it. While attacking, you can Digivolve, and then you can destroy one of your opponent's Tamers, and then he becomes active again after the attack, and that means that he becomes blocker with the Nene effect alongside him. So you get to attack and you get to defend right after that because he becomes active again. Kind of a convoluted play, but I mean, I only include 1 copy of this guy just for such a situation, because sometimes it does arise and you do need to get offense and defense off in the same time. Alright, so this next tech card is actually what I call Black Ice Wall, and that is going to be 2 copies of Kongo. Super low cost black option card, prevents any of your opponent's Digimon who are cost 7 or lower from attacking, which stops lots of things, especially in the Digicross meta where most of the Digimon are level 3s or level 4s. And in addition to that, your opponent cannot recover security, which means it stops Yellow Hybrid in a lot of cases from running amok on a turn before you go crazy. And our last tech card for the deck is, again, just me having the potential to give the deck to high roll, and that's going to be 1 copy of Joe and Izzy. Again, the deck is very memory hungry. The Nene Tamer does not grant you any memory at all unless it's destroyed, and then you lose access to your blocker effect. And that means you only have Izzy and the Prime Memory Boost. So this Tamer here allows you to go to 5 memory at the start of every turn if you have the Izzy Tamer alongside it and your opponent has 2 or more Digimon on board. And again, because the Digicross meta is so wide, This effect, I think, is a pretty low bar to get access to. In addition to that, it also gives you a little bit of dig potential. Whenever one of your Digimon is destroyed, you can draw one card. Alright folks, well thanks for watching. That's going to be the deck profile for DarkKnightmon in BT10. If you have any comments or questions about the deck, feel free to throw them down in the comments below. And yeah, I'm going to get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Be good.